Today I'm going to be changing the transmission filter and transmission pan gasket as a result of that on this 98 Jeep Wrangler. This has the 32 RH transmission, obviously automatic. Manuals don't have a filter. So I picked up this gasket and filter set from the local Napa store down the street. I picked up a bunch of ATF plus 4 from Walmart because it was about half the price of the Napa stuff. Seems like people have had decent luck with it, so figure I'll give it a try. We're going to need a bunch of that because obviously when you drop the pan on the transmission, you lose a bunch of fluid, and we'll need to refill it, and I'm not going to reuse the old stuff. The transmission has about 130,000 miles on it, and fluid really should have been changed a while back, and it wasn't. So, start off, we're going to get underneath the vehicle. We're going to get a catch pan to catch the oil coming out of the transmission, and we'll loosen it up. We'll crack the seal loose on one side, try to let it drain out in theory. In reality, it's just going to go everywhere, but in theory we're going to try to get it to angle down so it'll dump into a bucket, and we'll clean up the mess after that. Change the filter, put the new gasket on, put the pan back on, and refill it. Sounds like it should take about a half hour. We'll get back with you in another 3 hours or so. Alright, be prepared to witness the worst fluid spill this garage has seen in months. I already got most of the bolts removed from around the outside of the pan here. I left one, I think, on each corner for now. Actually, there's two on the back corner, so I'll pull one of those off. These are all 1/2 inch bolts, 1/2 inch drive. So I ended up lifting up the back of the Jeep just to get this pan somewhat level, so I didn't have everything going back onto the skid plate. Easier, well, not the easier thing, but the right thing probably to do would have been to remove this skid plate and support this whole assembly with jack stands, but it's more than I want to do right now. I'm prepared for the spill, but I'll see how long it takes to clean it up. Could have potentially been better off just taking off the skid plate and spending the time. But I do things the easy way. What I'm attempting to do is take all the bolts out so that I can get the fluid to hopefully flow out the front mostly. Like I said, it is going to go everywhere, but hopefully not too badly. There it goes. So I'll give you a quick shot of what I did to support the rear end, or to lift the rear end up. I drove it up on these ramps here, obviously one on each side. And even though they're not touching anything, I threw these jack stands under here because I have a real hard time trusting just one form of support. They're sitting underneath a real heavy-duty gas tank skid plate that I have. If I didn't have that skid plate, I would have put them underneath the axle tubes and probably spaced them up enough to touch the tubes. Yeah, so we're just going to let this drain for a little bit. At this point, I've got one in the front and two in the back holding it. The back ones I loosened just enough for the pan to pivot a little bit. And the front one's pretty loose. I'm going to loosen the back ones some more now because I think most of this is done flowing out from above the pan. And I don't want to bend it down too much because I don't want to bend the flange in the back and have a problem sealing with the new gasket. I've got the bolts in the back loose enough that it's not a big deal. I'm pivoting it like this. Just trying to splash a little bit of the fluid out the front into here so I don't have it all Drain right off the side when I pull the pan down. And I'm not letting this come down all the way and rest on the washer on the bolts and back. I'm supporting it at the bottom of this, whatever the cycle. Well, I think we've got all the bolts out. I'm going to back up enough that I'm hopefully not going to get too much of this on me. Alright, we missed a few steps in here because my camera died briefly. So I ended up taking the old pan off. I took the gasket off. I took the old filter off, which is down here now, and put the new filter on. And I cleaned up all the surfaces, and we're ready to put the pan back on. So after I pulled the pan off, I used the gasket scraper. A metal putty knife would work just as well. Definitely not a screwdriver because that will gouge up the surface. I have to scrape all around where the old gasket was. Then I used the T25 Torx bit to take off the old filter, put the new filter on. These are small screws going into aluminum, so obviously we don't want to over tighten them. Just good to kind of feel out the torque on the bolts before you take off the gasket, or not the gasket, before you take off the filter, so that you can tell about where they should be. So we've got that all set. Now we're going to put the pan back on. I got that all cleaned up, same thing. Scrape the outer edge with the gasket scraper. Metal putty knife would work just as well. I cleaned out the magnet, cleaned all the metal off of there, cleaned off all the chunks of band. I don't know which band it was, but something broke apart inside my transmission, ended up in the pan. I'm going to need a transmission rebuild probably pretty soon. Ended up getting the magnet all cleaned up, got all the metal shavings off of there. This is all good to go. There's no gasket left on here at all. If there's even a little bit, you can have a problem with the seal. So I just made sure to get all of it off. And I used brake cleaner to clean all the whole surface of this, the mating edge here, and the inside of the pan before putting it back on. So that's all cleaned up and ready to go. And we'll pull out our gasket now and hope that it fits. So I've only done a few of these. This is maybe the third, fourth transmission filter and gasket change that I've done. They all seem to come with this piece of paper. I don't know what it's for. If anybody knows, please leave a comment, because I'm very curious as to what it is. My best guess would be maybe to wipe dirt off of the gasket, or who knows, I don't know. Nothing about it in the instructions, so if anybody knows, let me know. Threading in all the bolts by hand right now. We'll go look up the torque specs and the torque pattern in a minute. We'll see if it's in the Haynes manual. If not, then usually the way to go about tightening these things is kind of start from the middle of each side and work out towards the corner. Essentially, you know, in theory, kind of ironing out the kinks, so we don't start in the corner and then have a big bow in the middle. With a rigid pan like this, I mean, I wouldn't think that it's too likely for that to happen, but I mean, if you're tightening a significant amount at a time on each bolt, there is the chance of warping the pan. So that's also where the torque pattern comes into play. Imagine the order that factory has you tighten these bolts helps to keep it from being over torqued, causing warpage on the pan. And I did not clean the fluid off of these bolts. They're all covered in transmission fluid right now, which means number one, they're going to be more likely to over torque them. They'll be easier to over torque because threads will be lubricated and there won't be as much resistance as there would be on dry threads. So let's be careful of that. I won't go quite as tight as I normally would, or quite as tight as the torque specs say, which also means that these bolts may be a little more likely to fall out on me, which wouldn't be anything new, unfortunately, but you know, what do you do? I guess you can clean them off, but then you got to clean out the hole that the bolt was in. Who knows what leached its way up inside there. And I don't know, I guess I'm just taking the easy way out. So, most of my hand tools are Craftsman brand, which I bought them while they were still being made in the USA. They are no longer made in the USA, and I refuse to buy more as a result of that. So usually, if I need new, I have most of the tools that I generally need already in Craftsman, USA Craftsman. If I need more tools, and they're decent tools that I'm going to need to use for a long period of time, I'll usually move on to the SK brand now, which is being revamped. I think the brand kind of went downhill a few years ago. I'm not sure if it was decades, but I know the quality was kind of going down, but then they got taken over by, I want to say it's Ideal Industries, and since then they've really been revamping the company and pumping out some real great stuff, comparable even to Snap-on and Matco, all the big names, and it's about half the price of Snap-on, which anyone knows the price of Snap-on, it's still a pretty expensive tool, even at half the price, but it's good stuff, and it'll last a lifetime. They do have a lifetime warranty on their tools, but it's not a no questions asked warranty like Sears had with Craftsman. It still has with Craftsman, even the Chinese made stuff. But as long as you're not overly abusing a tool, they seem to exchange it. Long story short, the reason I'm getting into this is SK puts out a gnarled extension for sockets on a ratchet set that would be perfect right now. So get a little bit off the bolt, and the gnarl will have just enough grip to spin this, but unfortunately I don't have one yet. Someday. If we look in the Haynes manual, we can see that the transmission pan bolts should be torqued to 14 foot-pounds. I haven't been able to find a torque diagram of what bolts should be torqued where, so I'm just going to work in kind of a crisscross star pattern and work essentially, you know, kind of work the kink out of the gasket. A theoretical kink. There is no actual kink because it's a rigid plate, but we're gonna tighten it uniformly, just a little bit at a time, so that the gasket doesn't get deformed, so that the pan doesn't get deformed. Yeah, we'll just go easy on it, and we won't tighten in a circle. It's the biggest thing. Don't tighten in a circle. Just cross whichever bolts you're going to. Got the bolts all torqued up around the outside. We can see the gasket started to squish out just a little around some of the bolts. So I take it that's kind of a sign to stop torquing, so we don't want to deform the gasket. See, just a little bit, not much, any more than that, and we're risking bending the pan or warping it.